This is our educational webinar from inheritance to investment. We're going to be talking today about real estate tips for families after inheriting property. A couple of housekeeping details today. We are recording this webinar. We hope to send this out to you after a quick review. With that being said, let's get rolling. Veronica, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So first we want to start off by just making sure that you signed up for the right webinar. So a couple of things just to think about, are you in the right place? So if you've just inherited a property for a loved one, and just could be 2 months ago, it could be 2 years ago, but you're still in the process of making decisions. You maybe have a family member that's inquiring what you think they should do for inherited property, or if you just want to get ahead of your own family's estate plan and just think about maybe you could potentially inherit a property in the future. So no matter what scenario you're in, you'll get some facts and some info that can help you guide your way as you're making decisions. So I would say our comments, and you can go to the next slide, Cynthia, won't be state specific, but definitely will apply across the board when you're dealing with an inherited property. And why are we bringing this topic to you? So before we jump into all of our great content, just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce ourselves. I know some of you may have been on one of our individual email lists for our business, may not be sure why we're even coming together and why we're qualified to talk about how to better plan for inherited properties. So I'll start with myself. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs who grew up in the rural South, which there's something about Southerners really being attuned to land ownership. And so that's something that I just had a value in at a very early age. And so although I didn't jump right into the real estate business, I was exposed to it because I had tons of aunts and uncles and cousins who at Thanksgiving dinner had their pager. So I'm dating myself, when a tenant would call and they would take the call. So a lot of mom and pop landlords. But I went on after graduating from Wharton, career in finance and product management. But I always knew and saw real estate investing as a possible parachute out of corporate America. And as I started to build my career, I really, like many of you who are probably watching, just wanted to have additional streams of income. So that's really what drove me to get more involved in real estate. But I, maybe not some of you, had a father who was a real estate broker. So I had the opportunity when I left my corporate job to explore a real estate career. And so today, I help my clients, a lot of them, like I said, are busy professionals, go from acquisition to cash flow for rental properties in the Philadelphia area. And I also worked with quite a few families that are trying to figure out what to do next with a portfolio after a seasoned real estate investor may have passed away. So that's a bit about me. I guess I'll pass it over to Cynthia for you to share a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Veronica. So I think I know some of you on online today and not others. So I'm Cynthia Meyer. I'm a financial planner and real estate business coach. I work with residential real estate investors mostly. And I'm a real estate investor myself. My husband, Steve, and I are first generation real estate investors, and we started building our portfolio, which consists mostly of small multifamily properties. We've got a small apartment complex and a few single family homes. We started building that portfolio in the Great Recession, and we were doing it from scratch. Neither set of our parents had been real estate investors. I work exclusively with real estate investors in my business, and I also have a continuing education course for other financial planners to teach them how to do real estate financial planning and real estate business coaching from the standpoint of a fiduciary financial planner. And so Veronica and I, we're friends. We co-host a podcast together, a video podcast called The Rental Property Cafe. And In the past year, we both lost our dads. And so we started having this conversation about like when you're working through all the estate issues and things like that. And this webinar is a direct result of these conversations that we were having with each other about what worked, what went well and what didn't go so well, and making this pass from one generation to the next generation. And so we felt really strongly that this was an unexplored topic for real estate investors, and we wanted to help create more multiple generations of real estate investors. We wanted people to be able to pass this stuff to their kids in a way that's going to create generational wealth. So what
Okay.
are you
So
today,
with that,
Veronica?
so that being said,
Yeah.
we have some ambitious learning objectives for the next hour. Again, the content is going to help frame. We picked 6 questions that will help you review your options about what to do next. And also within that, how to answer those questions as a family in terms of bracing, going through the difficult conversations that really is required in order to be successful. So now we only have an hour. So we're going to probably try to take us through to the near the end and save some time for questions. Although, as Cynthia mentioned, we do encourage you, if you have a question right away, don't wait till the end, put it in the chat. We'll definitely want to save some time for questions. And at the end, we have another resource that we will share how to download that will have some more questions that may help you on your journey. And because we know a number of you may have signed up for this workshop because you want more personalized attention and you want maybe more support, we'll just take a few minutes at the end just to share another opportunity that may be of interest. So hopefully that seems fair in the plan. And with that, we're going to, I guess, kick it off to the next slide.
Yeah. So let's just out of curiosity, who else is an existing real estate investor on the call, right? Who owns real estate investments individually? Who owns real estate investments with your spouse? Who owns real estate investments with other family members? Who doesn't own real estate investments but recently inherited some property? And who's exploring different ideas in real estate but doesn't own investment properties right now? Just curious about what your experience is and what brought you to the webinar today. Okay, so interesting. So it looks like we have about 40% of people on the webinar own real estate investments individually. Another 40% own them with their spouse. That's probably the most common type of real estate families that I see. 40% owns real estate with other family members. Very interesting. And about 20% of people on the call are exploring different real estate ideas, but don't own properties individually.
Yeah, interesting mix.
Yeah. So I would say that your responses today are very similar to what we see in the United States right now. A couple of weeks ago, the Gallup organization, released a poll that they do every year where they ask Americans about what they think is the best long-term investment for growth. And the choices were bonds, real estate, savings account or CDs, stocks or mutual funds, gold, or in the past couple of years, they've added cryptocurrency. And real estate has come out on top every year since the Great Recession. So approximately 36% of Americans prefer real estate as a long-term growth investment. Now, that doesn't mean those people aren't invested in other areas. It's just that they like their real estate the most. And when we see that broken down by age and income, we see that the younger somebody is, the more likely they are to prefer real estate as an investment option. We'd like to call that the HGTV effect. And the more income somebody has, the more likely they are to prefer real estate as an investment. And so we'd like to call that kind of the work optional or the passive investor goal that many people have, where they think, oh, maybe I can build enough additional sources of income that I can walk away from having to work for somebody else. So a couple of other interesting statistics. Individuals own approximately 41% of all rental units and approximately 3/4 of all small multifamily properties, like the ones that my husband and I own, for example. Um, Approximately 12% of individually owned properties have belonged to the same landlord for more than 30 years. Those people are going to pass those properties on to the next generation of their family, and they'll get a step up in tax basis when that happens. A little less than 17 million taxpayers claim rental property income. Now, this isn't millions and millions of dollars in rental property income for most people. That in 2019, which is the last date we have IRS data for, individuals claimed an average of $46,000 in gross income from rentals. And so, of course, we have depreciation expense, but still, we're talking about a nice amount of additional income, but we're not talking about people with 100 properties. Among rentals with individual landlords, 8 and 10 property owners manage their own doors. And interestingly, I think this is congruent with the Gallup statistic. The number of taxpayers claiming rental income has increased 7.3% a year annually since 2006. Huh? Another interesting statistic here. This is the Case-Shiller Index. It's a 20-city composite index of home prices. It's probably some correlation with why investors are preferring real estate as a long-term investment, is because they've seen their own home prices rise significantly since the Great Recession. And some of this is being transferred to the next generation. Veronica, why don't you take us through this slide?
And this is why this is the money slide of why getting ahead of inherited properties is so important. Now, this doesn't just represent real estate, but this shows that within the next 20 years, between Gen X and millennials, they could about 57, close to $60 million could be changing hands. That's really important kind of to get on top of. And are you prepared? Are you asking your kids or your heirs, are they prepared? I like to joke with one of my younger family members, and if I was neglectful in saying I'm also a real estate investor. Are you ready? Because you're between me, your mom, your dad, like you're going to inherit some real estate. Let's work on you now so that you will be prepared to take on and pass on to the next generation. So it's really important. Next slide. And one of the things that sometimes worries people about can they keep an inherited property is the looming thought of taxes. And so this chart shows the states where you really even need to care about taxes. So there are I lost count. It was like 8 states, I think, that have some form of inheritance or estate taxes. So the gray area. So by far, if you own properties in any of these other states, it's not a concern. But I know probably a number of people on the call are in Pennsylvania, like I am, or New Jersey, and you see they are one of the colored states in there. So it is part of your vetting process in terms of from a planning perspective for you personally, and as the person who may be passing on, you want to plan for how will your heirs deal with inheritance taxes or estate taxes.
So, a question here. Does inheritance tax apply in the state where the person leaving the property resides or the state where the person inheriting the property resides? So, great question. It's the state where the person leaving the property resides. For example, Pennsylvania has an inheritance tax, and that tax is paid in Pennsylvania, right? So, the heirs who might live in other states are going to have to pay that to the state of Pennsylvania. Okay, hopefully that
Okay.
answers your question.
All right, so we will segue and hopefully we'll try to, if we catch your question as we're talking, we'll definitely try to answer it right away. I'm Cynthia, I guess you're looking at
I'm looking at.
So we're going to jump into what we thought really are the 6 key questions. And so we're going to answer the questions with taking a quasi fictional family and kind of sharing what kind of advice we would give to them based on their scenario about how they should make decisions about the properties. I guess next slide, we go into the first question, which is my question. And this is really the fundamental. If you don't answer this question in a certain way, you maybe just press stop and move on or reconfigure. So is everyone on the same page about what to do? It may seem basic, but a lot of times it's really, people find themselves on different stands and they're at a standstill. And so getting stuck arguing is almost as bad as just doing nothing and avoiding answering the question in many cases. You can go show the next slide. We can talk about the Taylor family. So the Taylor family are the three cousins. They inherited property out of state. So let's say they live in Georgia and the properties are in Pennsylvania. Now, one cousin just wants to sell the properties immediately. One is gung ho on keeping it. The other one wants to keep it, but maybe they want to be a little bit more hands off. What should they do? How should they? Clearly are not necessarily all on the same page from the jump. You can go to the next slide. So now one thing to notice, so this slide is just showing about kind of the spectrum of options from selling in it to living in it. So one good thing, nobody wants to live in it. So they're agreed on that. So we can cross that off. And no, I'm sorry, that's my hand. No. And they also, none of their family members want to live in the property. So that's great. So then they just have to figure out how they feel about selling it or keeping it for a period. If I were talking to the Taylors, I would say, don't make a knee-jerk reaction to the immediate what they want to do. They should really think about, okay, in the next, let's say 5 years. So what kind of decision could you live with over the next 5 years? And sometimes answers may shake out if you think about their immediate need versus what they may regret if they do 5 years from now. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, one other point, the other thing is an opportunity. Maybe they're not on the same page from an education point of view. And that's why maybe the one person wants to sell it because they're just unfamiliar. And in family, I have a client that was similar to that. One of the cousins was an attorney. So she naturally just was more comfortable with going through the legal grind and managing tenant leases and that kind of stuff. In that scenario, like I said, I would try to help get everybody on the same page from a knowledge point of view, and then they can more practically make a joint decision.
And this is where you, as the real estate owner, if you own properties yourself, can hopefully involve family members in the decision-making process while everyone is still living. Right. And so that you can set your kids or your heirs up to succeed better if they understand more about the business that you've built and what you'd like to see happen to how they can benefit from it in the next generation. But a lot of times that doesn't happen. And so I would say it's very common that the situation that Veronica has described here, I see this all the time. Financial planners see this all the time in our practices, where there are different levels of knowledge and expertise and different heirs, or could be siblings or cousins, right? They want to do different things with their inheritance, and it can be stressful and cause a lot of disharmony.
Yeah, good points there, Cynthia.
Yeah. So one thing we would encourage you to think about upfront if you or your clients are in this situation is who has the authority to make decisions. Was the property held in a trust, right? In which case there is a successor trustee or trustees who are making the decisions. Was the property held directly in the name of what we say in financial jargon, the decedent, the person who passed away, and in whose names? So in which case there may be an executor that has already been named, and the executor makes the final decision. But maybe the executor is a sibling who has to still go to Christmas dinner with his or her siblings, and it can be really sticky. And We've all seen situations where there is a sibling or a cousin who is dissatisfied with the decision that an executor has made during the estate settlement process. And so it's just something to think through if you're doing this for yourself, you're doing contingency and succession planning for yourself, is thinking about how can you minimize conflict in the future. But we see this a lot, both Veronica and I see this a lot in our businesses. And then another thing is, do any title issues have to be cleaned up before the property can be transferred to beneficiaries? Is there an outstanding tax lien or something like that?
Yeah, it's really important not to guess on
Mhm.
that, because if you don't have the specific piece of paper that says you can make decisions, it's really a non-starter.
Mhm. So the second question that we would encourage somebody to ask if they have recently inherited property is, would you be happy with the money that you could make today if you sold the property? Everybody has a walkaway number, right? And there is a number at which it makes sense to continue to operate the property as a rental. And for many people, there may be a number that makes more sense to sell it and divide the money, and everybody goes and does their own thing. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the Rodriguez family. So these are cousins who inherited valuable land for their grandparents. And so this is similar to a client situation that I actually had several years ago. And one cousin wanted to build multifamily housing on the land. So that cousin they had resources, right? They were comfortable playing in the higher net worth space. They had a high income and a high net worth. And they were looking at this as an expansion project, right? Where they could realize their dreams of being a developer. Another cousin didn't need the money right away, but was negotiating with an energy company in the Midwest that wanted to lease the land for solar panels. Could be a super productive use of the land. And it did require regulatory approval. So they weren't going to get a final answer for about 3 years. And these folks had to, if they chose the solar panel option, right, they wouldn't know for sure if it was going to go through and get approved within the county for at least 3 years, right? And if it did get approved, then it would take a couple years for the solar panels to be built and installed, and a while before the beneficiaries would actually receive checks. But if it did happen, they would receive checks for 30 years. And then one cousin was the youngest, had three teenagers that were going to college and wanted to sell the land now to a developer to pay for college expenses. And so these three folks had wildly different walkaway numbers for themselves, right? And so one person sees it as an entrepreneurial opportunity, the other person sees it as a source of retirement income, and the third person saw it as a source of spending on education for their family. They have three completely different goals. How would you resolve this as a family, right? They're going to have a lot of heated discussions about what to do about this. And then how does this fit into your personal financial goals? So if we think about the Rodriguez family here in these three different families, right? So some of them maybe are married. They have goals and financial plans that they have for their own family. In the process of deciding about inherited property, there is, what is the property worth as an investment? But then it's also, what is the property worth to me in my own personal financial situation? And it might be a great investment, but it doesn't work with my personal financial situation, or vice versa. Right? Any comments on that, Veronica?
Yeah, I guess it's two points. One, about the personal financial goals. Everybody may not, we alluded to, everyone's not really in the same financial situation.
Mm,
And it may make sense for a family member that was originally in on the investment to divest or kind of cash them out for them to take care of their more pressing short-term
mm,
needs. And that's okay. It should be a kind of like a friendly, rational conversation
mm,
to an emotional situation. That doesn't mean they can't come back in on and invest on another property at another time when they're in
mm.
another situation. And so I think you have to be flexible enough to know that everybody may not be in on the opportunity because it just doesn't
Yeah.
make sense for them. And
Yeah.
then, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. And then the other point, the example with the Rodriguez family, they had really good potential opportunity, they had multiple opportunities with their piece of land that they inherited. I've also had some clients where it maybe was limited upside. And so the best thing to do was to sell the property and reinvest in another asset. So making sure that, so that's based to the previous question, that does the number make sense to you? So if all the numbers are low as opposed to, or lower as opposed to maybe another real estate investment in another area, then that is the totally good thing to do for clients. And I had a client that made me think about that. I wanted to share that.
Yeah. And interestingly, Veronica and I have both seen in our respective practices, families don't always think of it as, I'm going into business with my siblings or my cousins or whoever's in the family that has inherited the property as a co-owner. And you have to ask yourself, if you have an inherited property, right, do you want to be in business with your siblings or your cousin or whoever is the family member? Because real estate is a long-term investment. The real estate cycle is generally about 20 years. And to maximize the value of a real estate investment, you should own it for, typically you would own it for a very long time, right? You're not just talking about doing a 6-month flip. You're talking about being in the rental business with, or development business with family members. You, just like choosing any business partner, you want to make sure that it's going to work out, right? There's going to be harmony in the relationship. So there are, when the Rodriguez family, for example, when they're thinking about making their decisions, each of them has to think in the context of the 4 major resources in any business, right? People, money, time, and information. And for each of them, they've got different criteria of how much they have, not just financial resources, but how much time they have, how much knowledge they have, what other people can they bring in on their team to help them make this decision. And then the next example, the next question, is it a good investment for you personally? And again, that can vary. What is a good investment for Veronica and what a good investment for Cynthia might be different, for example, and investments for the people of you who are on our webinar today. So let's look at the example of the Adams family. This is a mother who inherited 1/4 of a family property with her 3 children in 2005. And it has since tripled in value. So this family they've been in the business together, and now they're considering selling the property and doing what's called a 1031 exchange, or a tax deferred like kind exchange, into a different investment property. Oh, we've got a father and mother here. So we didn't do our proofreading on the slide. So the mother wants to buy a single family home in the Midwest, and single family homes in the Midwest, and the kids want to buy multi-family housing in the Northeast, and they are not on the same page about what they want to do with the property. So this was derived from a real life situation that I had. And what actually ended up happening is they delayed the 1031 exchange, and they retitled the property. Instead of joint tenants, they retitled it as tenants in common, which is similar to how condos are owned. And then they were each able to do their individual 1031 exchanges. The mom went off and bought properties in the Midwest, single family homes in the Midwest, and the kids formed a new partnership, and they bought their properties tenants in common in multifamily in the Northeast. It's something that there are immediate decisions with inherited property, and then there can be decisions later on down the road after the heirs have been in business together. So how about the benefits of using inherited property as a rental? Veronica, you want to take us through this?
I did want to make the point of, just before we get into I was going to say obvious benefits, cash flow, appreciation. Cynthia, you already talked about the higher cost basis. So that's why you really need to not make an emotional decision of, I just want to keep grandmom's house. You really want to evaluate it based on as any real estate investment by these different components. And then understanding, do you have the financial resources on the maintenance side? Because there are expenses involved. So it's not just they're just catching the property. They'll have to be able to catch and manage the property. And that's why we always recommend with any real estate investor, come to us to have that holistic view. Obviously, appreciation was, Cynthia, you say the icing on top, I forget what you say. That could be a factor if you have an alternative area to invest that may be a higher appreciation. That might be a reason why you sell in one area, and where you have more of a, everybody more is incentivized to hold on for longer term when there's more upside. So hopefully that helps.
And making sure that everyone who is considering staying in the rental property business or real estate investing business with their fellow family members, that everyone understands that real estate has carrying costs. For those of you who are on the webinar today who already own properties, that there are ongoing costs to maintaining a property, and the rental property owner has to pay those costs whether or not the tenant is the tenant is paying, or whether or not the property is rented and occupied. We don't have to go through all the IRS expense categories here, but if you're doing this for the first time, right, there are expenses to maintain a property, just like there are expenses to maintain your home. You're generally going to estimate a vacancy rate. I like to use 1 month's vacancy for a single family home or a duplex, and 5 to 6% for multifamily in most places, depending a little bit on the part of the country that it's in. Somebody also has to be reserving on an ongoing basis, building an emergency fund for their property or properties, because things do break and wear out, and don't want to have the business account for the property empty and have to go to somebody to say, hey, we need a new washing machine or something like that, and have to try and collect money from all of the heirs to pay for the operational expenses. Where people get stuck sometimes is if they inherit a property, it's not in good working shape, it needs a little love before it can be rented out to tenants, and then who's going to pay for all that, right? Also, who's going to pay for the mortgage? Who's going to mortgage? If there's a mortgage on the property when somebody passes away, it needs to be refinanced, right? Can't stay in the name of the deceased person. So thinking through all those issues as well.
And one other thing, while you have the slide with the expenses, ideally, every real estate investor would have a nice, neat income statement that as soon as you got the property, they would hand that over to you. But in reality, a lot of us, even if you were buying a property on the MLS, these mom and pop baby boomer landlords, they don't have nice and tidy financials. So one of the first things that you need to do when you're evaluating whether you should keep it is to try to come up with the best estimates for these things. And I know Cynthia and I both spend time trying to have non-overly optimistic numbers for all of these for our clients, so they can really figure out if this is a good investment for you or not.
So interestingly, one of the questions in the chat box is, which is related to this budget question, is, I know many people who are retiring, they own small residential income properties and they're stuck, and I'm looking for your thoughts. For these folks, they don't want to manage the properties anymore. They don't think they can find good third-party managers, and they don't want to sell and pay the capital gains tax. What are these folks' recommendations? So it sounds like that the folks that this participant is talking about are tired of the day-to-day financial and operations managements of their properties, and they're looking for alternatives. So one of the things that happens is that person might, if they are in what's called an accredited investor, or higher net worth investor, they might be able to 1031 exchange into a Delaware statutory trust that owns a commercial real estate project later in life, and then still pass those shares of the Delaware statutory trust on to their heirs. And then the heirs or the beneficiaries, after that person passed away, could then decide what to do with the Delaware Statutory Trust, and then they could sell it, for example, or redeem it, and then use that money for other real estate projects. So hopefully that answers your question. If you have more questions about, if you want to dig into that a little bit more, we're not really talking about retirement right now, but we can maybe take that at the end.
Yeah, and it segues into the next question. I did see that question. We could probably, if you go to the next slide, about how does owning a rental property
Mhm.
work with your lifestyle? So alluding to, you haven't identified that any of your kids want to do that hands-on landlording that you did, and that you're worried that
Mhm.
you don't want to have them even be burdened by it. And the option that Cynthia mentioned takes that off the table for them, or at least makes it a little easier. But I think the person who wrote the question, knows that owning rentals isn't as passive
Mhm.
as maybe you see on YouTube. And so you do have to consider, if you're about to inherit a portfolio, 1 or 10, how is this going to fit within your lifestyle? And do you have to manage the properties exactly your parent did in order to be successful? So I think the good news is that you don't. And so if you go to the next slide, the Lee family figured out that they didn't have to do that. So there were siblings that inherited properties from their father, and he was an old school landlord. He went to the buildings and picked up checks. He oversaw every repair. He kept the numbers, the realm of kept. And his sons, we made it sons for the scenario. I can't do that. They didn't even live in the state. They were somewhat knowledgeable about real estate, but they were trying to get their arms around what the system that their father had. And this is similar to a client that I had recently. And what they realized is that they had skills that would lend to being good real estate investors at a high level, but they didn't have the bandwidth with their professional jobs to do it exactly the way their father did. You can go to the next slide and make the point of there's a lot of things that involved in managing a rental property, or managing a rental business. Cynthia, there was a point that Cynthia made earlier, that is an overall business. It really isn't just about just managing the property, collecting rent, and doing repairs. I think people focus on that, but there are a lot of different buckets that, if you go wrong, you could risk shrinking the asset when you're trying to grow the asset over time. So it's really important. What the brothers realized was, one of them was really good at bookkeeping, and so he was good at keeping on top of those expenses and paying the contractors and budgeting, and the other brother was really good at just dealing with the tenants. So they were able to renegotiate or leases, and they were able to move forward. But they realized they really did need a property manager. They tried to do it on their own, but they ended up hiring a local property manager to help connect the dots and just have the boots on the ground to keep things moving forward. I do think, if it would have been easier if I would have given the Lees advice earlier, because they probably knew that they're going to inherit property, because if your father is a big landlord, and that there's probably a high likelihood that you could inherit property, I probably would advise them to have the conversation earlier around, do you want the properties? How do you see this working for you? Maybe they can jointly agree and start looking for a local property manager sooner rather than later. Quite frankly, there's a lot of property managers out there. So if you haven't found one yet, does it mean that there's not a company that exists that could manage your properties? It's a very fragmented market. I think a lot of investors are not sure how to select one, and that's something one-off. I would definitely advise clients about how to, if they're in other states, what they need, what would be a good fit for them. So I think there's some training or education for general consumers of, how do I shop for a property manager? So I know Cynthia, you want to hop in.
Oh, no. So I think this brings us nicely to the next question. when we're talking about who's on your team. But I will say I invest out of state. My husband and I invest out of state with a property manager. She's totally fabulous. She's been a huge, important part of the growth of our real estate business over time. And we were really lucky, right? So not everybody finds the right fit at the right time, but a good property manager can, if you are a hands-off real estate investor and you want somebody to help you manage the day-to-day operations, can be a really important and strategic part of building a real estate team. And so that'll be a question for the heirs, right? The siblings or the cousins or the other family members, or a question if you're trying to do real estate with your family and start from scratch, right? Are you going to manage your own doors? Or are you going to use professional management? And there's no right answer for everybody, right? It's a family by family decision.
There's no right answer, but you do need to do a self-assessment about your skills. So I don't think the right answer is to do it all yourselves because you think you'll just for pure saving money. Because what I've seen is you save money on one of the line items of the expenses, but the other line goes up in terms of maintenance costs because you're not able to keep on top of what's going on with your properties without boots on the ground. And I guess I'm picking on the property manager, but there's cases where people underpick an accountant. So maybe before the accountant you use before you're a rental property investor and the accountant you use afterwards, they probably should be the different people unless that's a practice that they do. And so a lot of times we find our clients where we encourage our clients to level up across the board. It may be before you could just Google a lease, but now that you have a property with a pool and maybe you need a different addendums, maybe you need to actually ask someone to review a lease. So it's important to assess, if you're assessing what to do for property, are you able to pull a team together, whatever that local market is? So as you're evaluating the baseline rent and expenses, you should also be evaluating, can I get a good team together? And that definitely, if the answer, I was just talking to somebody this week and he had no team in Ohio and he didn't want to talk to anybody. I'm like, you're setting yourself up to not be successful or lose money. Or maybe a real estate agent, we back up. Sometimes they're a really good point. Sometimes a financial advisor might be a good point, depending on what part of the process you are, to invite other people to the table so that we can collectively strategize about what the right thing is to do.
And many real estate investors I've noticed in my practice working with real estate investors, many people are very DIY and there are parts of their real estate business that they like to do themselves. Some people like what you might call like the creative part, right? Like the getting in and painting the walls or renovating a property or making it look beautiful inside or out. Some people like to manage their own books or screen tenants. Many people like to use a property manager. Almost nobody should be doing their own electrical work unless they're an electrician, right? There's always going to be some team member that needs to be part of the overall family team. Real estate is a business, and we definitely invite you to think about building, if you're looking to scale, in particular, based on what you've inherited, we want to invite you to think about looking at it like a business and building a team of professionals where you need one.
And last, just bring it back to specifically, you're inheriting a property with your family. You have to be on the same page of how you make decisions about who to select. So we've talked about scenarios where maybe one relative wanted to be more DIY, the other person wasn't as confident. So maybe there's like a compromise in between of, we definitely outsource this function, but this other, because maybe one of the family members, like, or maybe one person is a contractor, and maybe you can defer to their decisions about who to hire to do certain maintenance, or maybe you're more comfortable with him doing some of the electrical work because he's an electrician. But I think everybody, in terms of back to the risk profile, these are another way to kind of, if you're trying to negotiate keeping people on board, sometimes it is about having them feel comfortable in a team. There's just a tip about, maybe sometimes people aren't comfortable moving forward because they see it as just too risky. but the more experts, the more solid a team, if you're the one who's leading, let's keep the property and do X, Y, and Z, the more solid team that you can put together, I think it also greases the wheels and makes people feel comfortable.
And for those of you who are real estate investors on the webinar today, and you're thinking about, "Well, how am I going to pass this to my kids or my heirs, for example, if you're really DIY in what you do, but your kids might not be as interested in the process or vice versa, right? That's a good thing to know and to have conversations with them now while you're developing your estate and contingency plan so that some of this gets worked out and isn't left to the next generation. So just to sum up here are the 6 questions that we think people should ask when they've recently inherited property, right? And these are questions that the family wants to ask of themselves individually and then collectively as a group. Is everyone on the same page about what to do with it? How does this fit into your personal financial goals? Is it a good investment for you personally? How does owning a rental property work with your lifestyle? Would you be happy with the money that you made if you sold it today? And then finally, who's on your team? To We want to, as a thank you for joining us today, Veronica and I put together a discussion guide. This is a question and answer workbook for families. And so if you want to go ahead and download it, we'll also send this out afterwards with a link so you can, or you can go to our course website, which is called realestateforgenerations.com, and you can download the Wealth Together guide. It's a workbook. So ideally, you would work through these questions individually. You're going to share this. It's a PDF file. You're going to share this with other people in your family, and they're going to work through these questions as well.
Mhm.
And then you're going to get together and talk about them. We aren't offering answers. The answers are different for every family, right? We're offering coaching questions to mentor you through this decision-making process. And if you want more support in this process, we do on a case-by-case basis offer customized boot camp for families. We're calling it the Generational Wealth Bootcamp, where we are doing a private event for families to learn strategies for family-focused real estate investing. And Veronica, why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
So this boot camp will be for you. You just want to get a sense of who should come or who with this kind of personalized um, VIP kind of session work for. So whether you've inherited the property just in your name, whether you're exploring investing with different family members. We just the scenarios that we talked about today. It could be cousins, it could be mother daughter, it could be 2 people, it could be 4 people. Basically, people who really have a specific investment or plan that they have on the table. And so one of the challenges of going through some of these questions on your own is how do you pull everybody back to have a conversation when they're at different levels of experience in real estate. And so when we put the guide together, we thought about we could just have them go off and figure it out themselves, but we knew some people may want to run those questions by some experts. And Cynthia and I we have mutual clients. I'll give her a call and say, what do you think about this? And so our clients privately get the benefit of us collaborating behind the scenes. And we thought with these inherited property situations, maybe it makes sense to get people together and have a more personalized experience going through questions like that in education. But Cynthia, I know let's share a little bit more about what it
Yeah.
is.
And so if this is something that applies to you in your situation right now, or you want to have a conversation about what that might look like, we'll send out some information about how you can book an information only call with one of us so we can give you a little bit more details about what that customized experience might look like. But what we envision is this is personalized and private to your family. It's a private Zoom session with everybody for 1 or 2 days. And there's a coaching process that gets everybody on the same page to make decisions about the process, to make decisions about the property or properties, then map out how you'll make decisions together, right? Who decides what and how things get decided. We'll offer an introduction to the fundamentals of real estate investing with partners. So maybe not everybody, not all the heirs are equally savvy or financially savvy and don't know as much about real estate investing. We'll do a reality check about the pros and cons of doing real estate with family, and we'll include, there's a follow-up component for accountability. So again, looks like we didn't include the link to schedule an information call here. So we'll send that out to you afterwards. And if that's something that is of interest to you, or if you're a financial planner on the call and you want to do this and come and do this with us, with your clients, this is something that we can chat about. So we hope that you have found these 6 questions to be really interesting today. Veronica, we've got a couple minutes here. Should we take a few of the questions in the chat box?
Sure.
Okay, so question number 1, can you talk about the possibilities of passing on a property to an heir that was a 1031 exchange? Okay, great question. That's a real financial planner-y kind of question. So I'll give you an example. So a few years ago, my husband and I did a 1031 exchange of a single family home into a duplex. The original basis in the property was quite low. We bought it during the Great Recession. And if we continued to own that duplex, I'm in my early 60s now, if we owned it and let's say till 100, and we leave it to our 3 children, right? At the time, that property will step up in basis to whatever it's worth at the death of the second spouse. And so we've taken that original basis and added hundreds of thousands of dollars in value, and that amount will step up to whatever it's worth at the death of the second spouse. So let's say it's worth $1 million when we pass it to our kids, right? We've saved them a whole lot of money in taxes. So that ideally the real estate investor who's building multi-generational wealth is looking to 1031 exchange every time they take profits in a property and kick the can down the road on the taxation and the depreciation recapture until they pass away. Hopefully that answers that question. Second question.
I was going
this
to
is a good
answer
one for you, Veronica. Yeah.
the last one. I wanted to jump on the last one about has there been over time a decline in the percentage of landlords who are mom and pop operations? Is it true the sector is slowly dominated by big fund operators? I would say the answer is no. And I'm a member of, I'm a property manager as well as a broker. I'm a member of an organization, National Association of Residential Property Managers. And the comment I mentioned before, that it's a very fragmented industry. I guess it's 2 parts. One, I think there still are a lot of mom and pop landlords who don't have a third party manager. I forget the stat that Cynthia shared, but it's 70-something% nationally or self-managed. So by far,
almost 80%.
Yeah. By far, as a property manager, the ocean are the people who are self-managing, not people changing property managers. There's more just new people deciding that they want to have help managing the property. And but I would say the driving force is that it's more complicated to be a landlord in a number of cities. If you're from California, definitely that's probably one of the hardest states to be a landlord in right now. But even Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, there's more requirements. So there's more ways to mess up as a landlord, I think, in a lot of municipalities as they're becoming more tenant friendly. So that answer really depends on where you're talking about. But like I said, California is known to really be a tougher place, even for professional property managers, let alone mom and pops. But in terms of the large property managers or the private equity money, so there is private equity money going into property management industry. So there are some larger multi-state companies out there, but what they're finding is they can't offer the same boots on the ground experience as some of the people who are very localized. So I guess there's probably a more nuanced answer, but I guess it's still very fragmented industry in terms of players. and it's still predominantly mom and pop, although that's a lot harder to do today than it was 20 years ago.
And then just going to do two quick answers since we are keeping you right at the top of the hour here. One is the question about, I realize your webinar is not state specific. However, recent California property tax changes are important to understand. Family members who inherit real estate in California plan to rent the property, and there could be a property reassessment. Yes, that is absolutely true. There are advantages for those of you who are not Californians or haven't lived in California. There are advantages to being a longtime homeowner in California with a lower property tax basis. And if the property becomes a rental, those kids aren't going to keep that low property tax basis. The property will be reassessed and property taxes will be significantly higher. So that would have to be included in the budget. Good point. And then finally, a question about taking over the mortgage of a parent if you have inherited a property for a parent. And then clarify your comment about refinancing an inherited property. So even if you're assuming the mortgage of a parent, you now are taking responsibility for that debt. So it affects your personal credit score and your personal debt to income ratio. And not everybody is going to be willing to take on additional large. Right. So
Or there just
well,
might be opportunities to refinance for another reason, like you want to, maybe it's a low loan to value and you want to finance some repair. So there's multiple reasons why you may not just want to just set it and forget it with the mortgage. You should always be evaluating, is there a better financing situation? Because who knows what the mortgage is like. And so in order to make that decision, you would have to take it out of the parent's name.
so many good questions today. We wish we could stay on and talk through even more of them. So thank you very much for joining us today. We will follow up with you in the next couple of weeks with a link to the recording if you would like to rewatch it. And if you would like to go ahead and download the Wealth Together guide, please do that. And if you have a question for one of us, maybe you have a situation where it might be helpful to have a personal generational wealth bootcamp for your family or your client's family, let us know. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, guys.